deep dive mythology,
lore,
Dungeons and Dragons.
Hello and welcome
to the Creative Thinker Podcast.
War is hell, but that's not the half of it. Because war is also mystery and terror and adventure and courage and discovery and holiness and pity and despair and longing and love. War is nasty. War is fun. War is thrilling. War is drudgery. War makes you a man. War makes you dead. From The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, that quote starts us off today as we talk about war as a setting. I'm really excited about this episode because I think a lot of really great stories take place in war. Star Wars.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one example.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are so many different examples.
Aragon,
Attack on Titan. There's history. I mean, there's a lot of good, and one of the bases that we're going to kind of keep going back to today is a World War II story, and I just went blank on what it's
Saving Private
Wow.
Ryan.
Yeah, I was thinking because
He would not have been saved if it was up to you. You would have forgotten who he was.
I would have, but there's also series Band of Brothers was part of that. There's a lot of
1917, that like one-shot movie that they just put out.
Yeah, that was World
3 years
War
ago.
Yeah,
That was good. Yeah.
There are so many different settings, like you said, that really create interesting stories and interesting dynamics.
Wind Talkers is one of my favorite ones.
I slightly remember that.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking just about what does this look like? What does having war in your setting look like? And we're going to be looking at some examples from Saving Private Ryan. It is a World War II movie that came out 2000s, I think, early 2000s.
Oh, who knows? Let's look it up. IMDb,
but
International Movie Database.
But the preface of the movie is D-Day happens. There's the storming of Normandy Beach, and then a group of people who survive the storming of the beach have to go and grab a person who his brothers have died, and he's the last one
Surviving.
last surviving brother. But he is deep in enemy territory, so it is their journey through the war-torn area of that area to get Private Ryan back home, and we follow their journey through a lot of loss.
Ultimately, the entire company is sacrificed for the life of Private Ryan.
Yeah,
Came out in 1998.
98. I was close.
Has one of the most brutal 24-minute scenes. Is called one of the most brutal depictions of war.
Yeah.
The storming of Normandy Beach.
Yeah, for sure.
So it leaves us with the question: war. What is it good for?
Absolutely nothing.
As a story, as a place to tell your story. There's a lot of things that work really good in a war story. And I don't have a comprehensive list per se, but I do have a list. And I think it's a pretty good one. I got some of this I adapted from firstdraftpro.com. So they got a blog over there, Guide to Writing War Novels.
Solid.
This is pretty useful, but I adapted what I needed. I left what I didn't, and I've added some other things that I think myself. So
yeah, absolutely.
So the first one that I think is maybe the main one, at least the one that I feel like starts a story off on a good foot. Because you don't want to just throw a character into a war story if it doesn't pertain to the character at all.
Right.
Like Mickey Mouse doesn't help to have... You saying that's a bad example?
No, I didn't say anything.
Yeah, so I mean, you can see when your character is not where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Long story longer. So I think heavy stakes for our protagonist's beliefs is a really good one. I was thinking about The Patriot when I first saw this one. Because the stakes for having the beliefs of wanting a free country, in the case of The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson, was that he had to leave his entire family.
Okay.
Because he had that belief. He had to leave them behind and possibly risk his sons dying on the front as well. But there is a... There is a good example in the movie that we said we would talk about, Saving Private Ryan, when they release Steamboat Willie.
Yeah. I mean, heavy stakes for our protagonists, I feel like, start from D-Day. Like, yeah, it goes to Steamboat Willie, but I mean, from the beginning, they're in war. And I think the why it is so brutal in that first 20 minutes is to show the brutality of war. Like, people are coming down on the boats. And before, I mean, as the ramps drop, you see people getting, shot and,
Just
and
chewed up by
blown to
bullets.
bits. Like, it was, I could only imagine how bad and how traumatizing that entire event and war would be. But they start from the beginning so that you can see it. There are people that are like, at certain scenes they're holding in their guts. They are seeing people that they've trained for through boot camp. Probably people, people lied about their age to enlist during this war. So you're seeing people you grew up with, your friends, your best of friends getting shot down. So
Kids.
the
Yeah.
yeah, it's a ton of kids, right? And so you're seeing one right away. This is a very very dangerous tone that we're setting here, and that tone is heavy stakes because the threat of death is there and does happen throughout this throughout Saving Private Ryan. And you follow a small squad of, I want to say, like, what, eight people or so, or whatever the cast is. Anyways,
I don't know.
not
Not
we're
a ton of
using it
people.
as an example because I feel like it hits all of these points. But man, I haven't seen the movie in quite a while.
Ages.
We did look up the Wikipedia and things like that. But anyways, you get the point. They're not afraid to kill their characters. There is no plot armor essentially for these characters, and that is the stake when you start seeing these people go down. Um, they have that stake and their belief. I think what's his name? Tom Hanks's character, the captain. He has to stick
Captain
to
Miller.
his beliefs because he is given an order and he has to follow those orders, no matter how his squad feels about those orders, because it does come into play at a later point. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I really
I think that's a
go ahead.
good emphasis for just your story in general. How can you make this heavy stakes? How does that look like for your story, or what does it look like whenever you create a story, a war setting? What are the heavy stakes? Are they going to be on the front line, or is it going to be something different? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think the really cool part about Steamboat Willie is they're having him dig his own grave, and they're just going to shoot him in the head and leave him there because
Yeah.
he's just somebody on the opposition, right?
Hmm.
And they've just seen all their friends die,
Hmm.
and there's one person who says that this guy is worth saving.
Hmm.
One person, and that's who he, plot twist, ends up killing later. But um, he says that this guy is worth saving, and they let him go, and because of those beliefs, he dies later on.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's like it's very very visceral and intense, the outcomes that I mean, there's so many war stories that are coming to mind right now that it's like they let somebody go because they feel like they are redeemable.
Hmm.
That is a core belief that they have, and because of that they come back and kill somebody that they love, kill them. Some horrible thing happens because they trusted humanity
Hmm.
more than they should have at the
Yeah.
time. So yeah, heavy stakes for our protagonist's beliefs. You wouldn't get that in any other kind of story, really. If they thought, well, I have a strong belief in humanity and Pride and Prejudice, well, maybe they got their heart broken, but you're not, losing friends and things like that. So that's what I mean by heavy stakes.
Hmm.
Um, the next one is it shows the brutality of man and how people cope. And we've touched on this a little bit already,
Hmm.
or you did, that, as they're coming on that 24-minute scene of coming onto Normandy Beach, I mean, people are just getting absolutely destroyed.
Hmm.
And it's very, very jarring the way they filmed it. And I think how people cope at the end, how Captain Miller decides that his orders are important, how he decides that anything after that is important, shows a lot about how he is coping with what's in front of him. He's choosing his orders. He's choosing to follow something he is told to do because that makes sense of the world around him.
Hmm.
I'm sure that, I mean, there's more to it than that, but I think
Yeah.
that that's a beautiful thing to show because, there's a lot of terrible things that happen in life.
Hmm.
And a lot of us look around at those things, if we really look them in the face and we say, how is that possible that that can go on? But we know that it does, and we have to come to terms with that.
Yeah.
And it's something that is universal in humanity. If you
Hmm.
look at the darkness, you have to come to terms with its existence as you continue with your life and try to be happy and find reasons to go on. So I think that that's a really powerful story to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of brings to mind, not even just in this movie, but showing the brutality of man and how we as people cope. Like that can either be your main character or your villain character being brutal, and the people around them have to cope, or your main character having to embrace the darkness for their belief, and then having to cope with that decision of going down a darker path and having to fight that internal battle of what's right and wrong. But what I did was, quote unquote right, but what it felt wrong, or something like that. There's this balance of morality almost there, that your characters have to go through, which again, in a war setting, sometimes it can be very clear, and sometimes you can make it as gray as you want it to be, like, you know um not killing someone, right, and letting them live. I think that is a
Yeah.
coping mechanism, and then that person coming back and just not caring. Like, okay, that is the brutality of man. He comes back and uh, rejoins with his allies and starts firing on him, not trying to miss. He starts killing people. So, um, yeah, that there is definitely that brutality that happens. Um, yeah, yeah. With that note, uh,
What's the next one?
moments of kindness and joy stand out in a deep and emotional way.
It's like a high contrast environment. So
Mhm.
I mean, there's so much. There's a somber tone in most war stories, because how can you not? If
Yeah.
you take it seriously and you set up the story in a way that feels impactful, I mean, yeah, people are going to be a little bit depressed. I mean, a little bit somber, a little bit serious when they read or watch or whatever. And so giving that light, giving those moments, I mean, they're sharp contrasts and they're very emotional.
Mhm.
So anytime your characters are kind to somebody, anytime your characters try to lift the spirits of the people around them, there's examples in Saving Private Ryan, but I keep thinking about, because I'm reading through the books right now.
Mhm.
Cole from Coltrane from Gears of
Oh,
War.
you're reading through those? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Dude, that is a great example, absolutely.
yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead and describe what Cole is like, what the Cole
I
train is
mean,
like
yeah, he's just like a big like football player, football
in
in
their
in
world.
their world.
Yeah.
He's always yelling "Yeah, baby," and he's always like smiling, cracking jokes. He's always like, if somebody gets hurt or dead or something, and they need to find a proper burial for that person, he's gonna be the one carrying them out. He's gonna be the one making sure that they do the good things that make them good people.
Yeah, so and Gears of War, it's another war setting, but it's they're essentially fighting aliens from underground. I mean, not necessarily aliens,
Yeah,
but like these creatures that come from
they
underground, and
call them locusts,
yeah,
but
they
they're
call them
sort of
the
like
locust.
gummy, weird looking, like orcish.
Yeah, it's definitely like orc feeling or orc vibe. And it's like humanity's last stronghold, and they're trying to band together. So it's a war story, but it's more of a survivor story. But yeah, he definitely keeps the attitude light,
Yeah.
because Marcus Phoenix, the main character, is a very grim dude.
And the setting is too, like everywhere you go, buildings are broken in pieces. There's no survivors really anywhere. You don't find other people very often. You just find more and more of these grubs, these locusts,
Hmm.
um, and is a very bleak environment. But Cole is such a positive character,
Yeah.
and it stands in sharp relief. And it always, like, you have characters die, you have bad things happen. It's like you fight all the way up to an objective, and as soon as you get there, it gets blown up.
Hmm.
It's like, even though it's a video game, like you just played it for 2 hours. That's incredibly disheartening.
Yeah. I think of another character, like I said, I wanted to try and keep, one story or one movie through so we could keep the example. But man, there are so many examples of the setting that we're talking about. I think of Sasha in Attack on Titan. And she is one of the cadets, and she's the foodie. So whenever food's out, like she goes like full anime and like trying to eat all the food, and she's always obsessed with like grabbing meat from somewhere. So if there's meat, she's the first one there, and then she has a hard time like sharing it with anybody else. But it's very much like a not a joke character, because she's really important, but it definitely brings some liveliness to the setting that could very much be and is pretty dark.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking of the Gears of War books too, because I just read this scene last night. where I think Dominic, who's another character in Gears of War, gives out his rations to some kid that's like starving on the
Yeah.
road. And
Yeah.
it's like just those little acts of kindness can show where your character's values are. They can show that there is a little bit of light in this lack of humanity
Mhm.
that is the war landscape. And that's another wonderful story to tell because so much of our stories focus on, well, who are the leaders? Why are they fighting? You know, all this like high level stuff or killing off a king or something like that. But
Yeah.
it's like on the ground, how are people staying alive? The ones that are, how are they staying alive? You know,
Mhm.
and it's either they tear each other apart or they come together in kindness. And if you can show them coming together in kindness, that's really a beautiful sort of
Mhm.
healing kind of story.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah, yeah. Moving on to our next point here for what the war setting does for us is it starts to bring camaraderie amongst the survivors of war. So obviously in Saving Private Ryan, there's the squad, and there is um this group. You know, they're going through the countryside, and there is, you know, that those moments of humanity that they're showing to people who are technically in like enemy territory. And the example that you put down was uh what's his name?
Private Caparzo, Vin
Oh
Diesel.
yeah, Vin Diesel.
Yeah.
Yeah, he you know saves a little kid, little I don't even know what.
And if his name was Vin Unleaded, his career would be very different. Anyway,
My gosh.
yeah, everybody unsubscribed. Okay,
Yeah.
so
um
anyway, so he saves this German girl, and I don't even remember the context of it because, but he ends up getting sniped. It's like
mhm,
there is somebody shooting in this town, and he sees a kid, and he protects the kid, and then he gets shot,
mhm,
ultimately dies.
mhm,
And he holds up a letter. You know, it's raining. He holds up a letter and says, "Take this to my dad." Right.
yeah.
Another sacrifice he gets to make. And the reason I chose that as the example is why do we care about him? We care about him because he has become part of this family unit that is sort of like trauma bonded
Mhm,
as they go through this war setting. And because we know that he's a good person, when we see him be a good person to his detriment, to his death, to his end,
yeah.
it's a really impactful story, and it makes us care about him all the more, even though they're strangers before they join the military. There's a camaraderie now, which is like, you know, your unit is your family. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter who's there, you're going to protect them with your life, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's such an important, you know, story element anyways, is that that trauma bonding.
Yeah.
Because it happens in real life, man. Like there's definitely some people that I worked at with FedEx where we went through it and we were young and dumb, so we felt like it was on a much more intense scale than what it actually was. But, you know, there was camaraderie through it. Like you stuck through it thick and thin, and you know, you helped each other out, and we took our stuff very seriously. um and we thought we were the shit, and we acted like it. um
Hell
but it
yeah.
was like there was a group of us who like we would always go and either help each other out, or we would like try and be pushing each other to be better and be better, or you know, you could do more, and then like we try and challenge each other, like, well, I can load 4 trucks, and it's like, well, I can load 5 trucks by myself, and it's like, okay, well, dang, now I got to try and load 6 trucks. I can load a whole van line on my by myself. Like, well, not good, but I can. And so, you know, you would push, and that created camaraderie. And I think, you know, while it's not war in my example, that you can definitely transfer that over into that kind of either war setting. I think look at Lord of the Rings, Legolas and Gimli, right? They had that camaraderie of like, oh, how many orcs did you kill? They're always counting, right? Like, Gimli's sitting on an orc, and his axe is in his head, and Legolas shoots him. And he's like, oh, that brings me up one more than you. And Gimli's like, hey, my axe was in his head. That doesn't count for you, you know. And so it creates that camaraderie. That war setting creates that. Maybe a little bit quicker than it would just in a natural. I mean, dwarves and elves in Lord of the Rings, they don't necessarily get along, right? I think that's where we kind of get that fantasy trope. So for them to be, you know, connected already through this setting is another proof on what it can do to your characters and your main group of yeah, your main squad.
You figure the trust to entrust your life to somebody else and say, well, yeah, I can't cover every direction at once, and you've got me and I've got you, and actually take that to heart. I mean,
Hmm.
that's got to be one of the strongest bonds you can have with somebody, or at least the strongest amount of trust you can have with somebody.
For sure.
And that's that's a hard story to tell in other formats. It's not impossible, but I mean, like, that is a hard story to tell somewhere else.
Hmm.
So war setting really lends itself well to that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So it's a somber setting. We talked about that a little bit already, but I mean,
Hmm.
like, obviously, World War II is a pretty rough one that people go back to a lot. If you're thinking Call of Duty, Saving Private Ryan, whatever it is, World War One with 1917,
Yeah.
um, all these huge societal events that are just terrible.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it also creates a vibe too. Like, even war as a setting doesn't necessarily mean ongoing war. It could have meant like a previous war. So what would that lead to? It would lead to obviously a population decline. What does a population decline look like? Well, some areas are going to be abandoned. Okay, so now you're going to be going to areas where there is, production lines that aren't being used anymore, or villages that got wiped out, or didn't have the resources to stay there, whether it was a food related, medical related, because it needed to be used for the military. So now there's villages that are ghost towns. And things like that, and that creates definitely a somber setting. You could be going through, the path of, behind the path of the war, and seeing what it is left behind in any type of setting, whether it's, a modern setting or even a fantasy setting. What does the destruction of war look like as you travel behind this path? What does it look like above this path? It creates either moments of tension or it creates moments of somberness. Um, I'm running a game right now, and essentially, it, not that it is creating a war, and we'll see when this comes out if that's what happens, but it's definitely that threat of it's about to go into another war, because there's a lot of political figures, and like the emotion at the table went to become very tense. And so that is what that can do. That war setting, that threat of war is like, oh man, we're about to get thrust into a whole different, you know setting. It's going to change the direction of the campaign for sure. A lot of TTRPGs typically aren't war settings, right? You're more adventuring, and I guess there is some political intrigue going on. But once you introduce that concept of war is a possibility, I think that raises the stakes, because it's it's not good. War is very ugly, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and even if you had a story where it's like, okay, there's this lady that her husband died in a car wreck and she's trying to make friends now, and she finally meets somebody that's putting up with her enough to be friends with her. Uh, using the trope of like maybe she's like rude to people and very, very pulling away from society and stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, if you have that story and you're like, this setting that they're in, she's just spending a lot of time in coffee shops or like in parks and stuff. It's like it doesn't feel intense enough if you say, well, yeah, her husband was the only one that didn't go to the war out of everybody in her neighborhood.
Mhm.
That it's going on. It's not even part of the story. And her husband just died in a car wreck, and the rest of the husbands are still alive. You know
Mhm.
what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like that adds another layer of somber to your story. And even though it's not even necessarily a direct character in your story, that
Mhm.
can zest it up a bit.
Yeah, for sure, for
Yeah,
sure.
get it cooking.
I think we kind of touched on this too, through that somber setting, but examination of poverty and disillusionment, especially the poverty setting. I think that, like I said, like the villages or cities, their resources could be drained for war, and that definitely affects, it affects their livelihood, and it affects their everyday life. And I think you could definitely, if you're trying to introduce war as a setting, you could create those day-to-day habits in the early parts of your story, or of, yeah, of your story, and then when war comes, see how those are changed, and see like how that has become chaotic now. It's definitely something you can look at, and seeing what does it look like when a resource that you are used to having is gone. Um,
Yeah, that makes me think of Cinderella Man. Have you ever seen that movie? It's a
Oh
boxing
yeah,
movie.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen it, but I don't remember it very well.
Yeah, so I mean,
Oh, I think so.
he's
Here.
got to fight, like he's a fighter, right? And he's got to fight with a broken hand so that he has enough money to,
Yeah, yeah.
and he's moved on from fighting and he doesn't want to anymore. And I forget how he breaks his hand, but anyway, he's like doing dock work because that's the only thing he can get, and
Yeah.
it's not consistent. It's just like whoever we need at the time.
And then like they handpick people like at the
Yeah,
gates. They're like, we're gonna take you today. We're gonna take you today. We're gonna take you today. And if he can't show that he's got a broken hand, or else he's not gonna get picked.
and the whole family is sharing like a roll and a lump
Mhm.
of cheese for dinner, and it's
Yeah.
like, just terrible stuff. And um, you see the happy moments that they have anyway, but you
Hmm.
also see just the desperation of it is,
Hmm.
um, again, hard to, not impossible. Obviously, we have people struggling any time in any story, but it's definitely a good way to go about it in a war story. That's something you can get out of one of those. Political intrigue and rivalries. I think is something that you can get out of a war story, but and I put that in there more to say, I mean, because obviously there's political intrigue books out there, and
Hmm.
that's sort of a different genre in my mind, at least.
Hmm.
And but I put it in there to say, like, when we have big battle scenes in books, I hate that. I get so bored. It's like, I don't know what it is, but it's like once the action starts, where it's like, okay, yeah, they're gonna just like hack at people for a while, and you're like, okay, they killed somebody. Okay, they killed somebody else. Okay, they killed somebody else, and it's
Hmm.
like, it doesn't matter how they did it. It just gets boring after a
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
while.
for sure.
It becomes mundane. And so I put that in there to say, if you're writing about war, make sure that the intentions are there, and the key points. We keep the structure of drama and fiction
Hmm.
in the story. So it's like, in The Hobbit, when they come across that orc guy that rides a warg and has a metal arm, it's like, well, we kill him at the end of the first movie. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
And that is what the entire last battle in that movie is about. Is killing that one guy,
Hmm.
because we've had conflict with him. We know who he is. We know what the stakes are, and we understand that this is a big stepping stone, is killing him. So yeah, there's some cool shots in that battle and some cool moments leading up to it that show us that our characters are in danger. But the main interest of that battle is that our hero is going to fight our villain.
Hmm.
So yeah, making sure that you shore up the antagonist protagonist relationship, and that will drive a battle much better than, okay, yeah, he's using his fancy knife now, you know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think when we're talking about political intrigue and rivalries, I think of there's a scene in Aragon where he is in the dwarven city, and
Trondheim.
yeah,
Yeah.
Trondheim, and he is traveling with another dwarf, and there's like rumors of more Urgles or something that's attacking the city, but it's not the full on war. This is later on, and there's already some political mess going on where Aragon isn't necessarily welcome here because they're trying to um, elect a new king, but he is also a part of the one of the clans, his adopted brother. So he has by title allowed to be there, but he is looks more elvish than dwarvish. And so there is a scene where there is a fight, and like you said, sometimes when you're reading it, you're like, okay, just let me get to the end of it. Like, what is the result of what's going to happen? It's like, oh, these are dwarves that are fighting him. This was a dwarven spellcaster that happened, and then they ended up killing themselves. Okay, what is their clan symbol? It was, oh man, this is one of the clans here was trying to kill Aragon. So there was this political mess kind of going on, and I think that's a way that you can do it to, I mean, you make your combat exciting, make it count.
Purposeful. Yeah. Make
It's
it part of the story, part of the narrative. Like, what is the goal of this series of scenes? Why is he with the dwarves? And who doesn't want him to be there? So it's like, that who doesn't want him to be there becomes the entire plot line. So even through the
yes,
fighting, even through, like, every scene is about that. And
yeah.
if it's not going to pull your reader through it.
Yeah, after that, it's like, oh, which one of the characters in the past has he offended and is going to be the one that's going to get the fall for this happening? Very interesting. I mean, obviously, it was very interesting at the time as well.
Yeah.
So,
Just a little side note there. That's moving on to the last one of what does war do for you? Um, Group triumph. I think that this is the entire climax of Saving Private Ryan, right?
Hmm.
Like when Captain Miller dies and he says to Private Ryan, "Earn this,"
Hmm.
right? The group that was that military unit all died to save one person,
Hmm.
and he says, "Earn it." At the end, earn the loss of all these men. Why are you the only one who survives? Make sure it's good.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and that wouldn't happen without the triumph of the group.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful thing to say. This is what you can do with others.
Hmm.
And yeah, that person. I think it's a really cool shot at the end of the movie when it cuts back to the old man at the grave. Um, Private Ryan has lived a good life, and you see his whole family. I think it's like 3 generations
Yeah, it
there
looks
with
like
him,
it for sure.
and so yeah, he's lived a good life, and there are more people also living a good life because he did.
Yeah.
And then that feels worth it.
Hmm.
Suddenly, when you see a little kid, you're like, okay, yeah, it's worth
Yeah,
it.
for sure, for sure.
Whatever happened, water under the bridge. We did
Yeah.
it.
I think that group triumph, I mean, you look at so many other movies, like we mentioned Star Wars, right? There's group triumph at the end of, each trilogy. It feels like there's group triumph. Well, I guess not the prequels, but it
Depends on which group.
yeah, right.
Go Team Anakin.
Yeah. I was rooting for him the whole time. I
Yeah.
love Vader.
Yeah. Really
and-
anti-youngling.
Yeah, and Return of the Jedi, right? So that is they go their separate ways, but there's the group triumph and then there's the party afterwards, right? So like there is a celebration in group triumph, and they had to go through 3 movies, and they had to go through the second movie, Empire Strikes Back, and they had to go through loss to be able to feel the sweet delicious victory and actually enjoy it, after you've experienced the loss at the end of that. So that group triumph, you can definitely do that. That's what you should be reaching towards in your story, is that group triumph, and what do they overcome to get to that group triumph.
I think that's an interesting point about writing in general is we are always looking for wins, even in losses.
Hmm.
It's like, I mean, we always do that. If like something bad happens to us, it's like, well, what can I learn from it?
Yeah.
Or like, what good happened? Or what am I looking forward to? There's always, not always. I mean, some people have a negative self space, but for the ones that have a little bit more positive self talk, they're looking for something positive
Yeah.
that they can get out of it, and then drop the negative and move on.
Hmm.
So if you're not writing in these triumphs in your story, especially if you're talking about a war setting that's going to be just naturally kind of brutal,
Yeah.
if you don't have those little wins and those little positives, then you can really have reader burnout.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
don't want that either.
Exactly.
Or writer burnout. I mean, my goodness, you're gonna sit there
For
and
sure.
write terrible things for months on end.
Right.
So that brings us to the end of that section. I wanted to jump into our inspirations, and then we'll talk about themes that you can get in a war setting, and that'll be a pretty short section.
Hmm.
When and why we use war in our stories, and you're running a D&D campaign
Yes.
right now that will likely end in a war setting. We'll see
Yeah,
how the
yeah.
characters.
It is ongoing right
Yeah.
now. We are. I told them essentially we're in the long night before the outcome of
dawn.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be interesting.
And then we'll round it out with the drawbacks of using war as a setting, which is, just an FYI for you. I think it's all interesting stuff, so please hang around for that. But for now, Michael, what's been inspiring you?
So like you said, I've been running a game, and the setting is supposed to be higher fantasy. We're actually playtesting, so it's not technically D&D, but the world building is still the same. It's just the system is set up for a little bit more high fantasy. So I started listening to a podcast called World Beyond Numbers. It's got Brennan Lee Mulligan, Lou Wilson, Erica Ishii, and Abria Ironguard. And if you don't know who those people are, they're very big in the D&D community. As far as live streaming goes, I believe 3 of them are a part of, or 2 of them are technically a part of Dimension 20. And Abria has DM'd for Critical Role and D20 in the past, and Erica Ishii has also been a player at those tables. But they are focusing on a D&D. It's kind of an actual play, but it is also heavily edited. Not to the extent of like Dark Dice. There's still the roles that happen.
Love Dark Dice.
Yeah, but it is edited as far as like the music. So Michael Gelfney, who is I use his music for like ambient stuff whenever we play games. He has created the music for their podcast, and then they are very story focused, and I have been enjoying that so much because one of the players is a wizard, and now there's this whole like high fantasy society built around these wizards, and they have a whole different system on how they start getting like almost like level up, and like what their ranks would be. They have like uh helicopters in the cities, but they don't call it helicopters. They have very powerful magic, and it's just so, the way that they tell the story is so interesting. And there's like 23 episodes out, and they're still level 2.
Wow.
And it's so crazy because if you know anything about D&D, like 20 something sessions, you're probably at level 5, 6, maybe potentially 7, depending on how the story is going, and what's been thrown your way. And I think the best quote from them is, "We're making level 10 moves, but our stats are level 2." And it feels like that because the importance of being a mage here and getting that titled mage, it really means something. There's a player who's playing a witch who she has now become like a witch of the city, and has been it's taken this role now because the current witch has died, and so now she is taking that role. And it is a very important role in the coven and in the witches of the world. And then there's these spirits that are the one of the other players is playing a spirit, and it's just so interesting, like the dynamic, and how they're telling the story has been so rich, and they're all committed to the story. Sometimes you'll watch stuff and some people don't seem as committed to the game or committed to the bit. They're 100% into it. And it's just been lovely to listen to. And it has created so many different inspirations. Brennan Lee Mulligan, the DM, I really enjoy him. He does tend to talk a lot in his descriptions, and I know that's been a turn off for some people I've recommended for him. But man, he's been doing, like, he was when he was younger, he did LARP camp, and he was like one of the counselors for that.
Interesting.
So he's been doing storytelling stuff for younger kids for 15, 20 years, something like that. So this dude knows how to build a world. And it is very, very fun. And then of course, if you see him in Dimension 20, like, he creates vastly different worlds for each setting, and it creates a different vibe for each one. And it's just been a real treat to listen to. It's on any podcasting app that you want to listen to.
What's the title again?
It's called World Beyond Numbers.
I'm gonna write that down. I actually want to listen to this.
Dude, it is.
I haven't heard of it before.
It is really good, and like I said, it's very character driven. So the first couple episodes, I was like, this is kind of not slow, but it is chapter 1, right? So then you're seeing what their day-to-day lives look like, and that's the story, right? That's one of the themes here that we talk about in War, is seeing the day-to-day lives and then how it's changed and turned on its head. And that's definitely what you see, is their day-to-days, and then how it continues to change. And the second to last episode that they have out, woo-wee, it was good. Some decisions were made. I was like, man, this is awesome. I love it. So that is what's been inspiring me recently, as I have been listening to it, and I have a mage and a part of our campaign who I feel like the vibe is very similar to the mage in this in the World Beyond Numbers. So I'm really enjoying it. I'm really glad to have that high fantasy inspiration so that I can start continuing to build a high fantasy world.
Nice. It's good to have those intense inspirations. I feel like there's sometimes I'll give my inspiration, and it's not like I'm half-assing it or anything. It's just like, some weeks you find something that's like, this is getting me through this week, and then there's some weeks where it's like, this is making me want to live for next week.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And this sounds like a living for next week thing,
100%.
and that's pretty cool. It's rare in life you get those, and it's good to hold on to them.
Mm-hmm. What has been inspiring you, good sir?
Andy J Pizza. So the creative pep talk I've been listening to, that's sort of how he says his name. I know I'm butchering it, but I mean, like the Creative Pep Talk is a podcast also that I've been listening to for I think a good year and a half now. And he always has good research and like relatable stories. He'll talk about his process and stuff, and he always says that he's working through things on the podcast, and that's the reason he still does it, because he's busy being professional, and but he's just sort of verbally working through his ideas, and that's why he still does the podcast. But it's like he does the research ahead of time, and then he'll share a story about why he's working through this, and it's always, like I said, very grounded and relatable and fun. And I feel like he makes a point. I mean, he has a whole section of giving actionable tips, things that you can do to change your life very quickly and easily. And he's just a real positive dude. He's real peppy. And he's, kind of got that super, a little bit high pitch, a little bit super energetic kind of voice where it's just like, yeah, he can go get it. So it's always motivational listening to those. If I'm a little bit down, I'll throw on his podcast, and it's like I feel better. So I also listen to it on 1.5, so maybe that's why his voice is high pitched. Don't do a spit take. He just drank some water.
Dude, that's funny.
I listen to most podcasts at 2.0, so take it as a compliment. Andy J Pizza. Yeah, dude.
I know that's I know people do that, but man, that's so tough. I've tried to do that on some things, so like 1.5 or 2.0 it, and I'm like, nah, that's not the way it's supposed to be listened to.
Yeah,
I can't do it.
That's true, but I can barely listen to people when they're just talking on the podcasts. It's like even YouTube videos. I'll do the same thing,
dude. So
it's like that's the right speed of information for me. I feel like.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean that makes sense for sure. There are definitely some things where I'm like, ooh, I wish this could be a little bit quicker. It's like that video we watched a recap of Saving Private Ryan because neither of us have seen it in quite a long time. And the person that talked over it was like a person who did the review, and luckily they had the actual movie like going on in the background in different scenes. But we put it on 2.0 and still she was talking slow. I was like, come on, man. let's pick it up a little bit.
And it was only like 8 or 9 minutes, and half of the video was, please check out my other videos on this. And it's like, okay,
yeah,
there's nothing in this. Why would I check out the other one?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyways,
yeah. Gripe aside, yeah, I like listening on 2.0. It makes sense to me. If I start losing where I'm not processing the information, I'll slow it down to 1.5.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah, if I listen any slower, I just start falling asleep.
That's what's up. All right, heading back to
themes of war. Nice. This is a real brief section where it's like, here's the themes that you're going to see in most war stories. You're going to see heroism, obviously, like local boy makes good. One person who saves somebody and loses their life because of it, or is able to save their comrade from dying, whatever. Heroism is going to be big. Grief is going to be huge, especially if you're talking about soldiers, especially if you're talking about the families of, or just people who live in a city that most of the fellas and ladies are off doing war effort stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a huge change in just the demographic of where anybody lives.
There's even like the grief of change and the grief of like not necessarily losing people.
Occupation.
Yeah, grief of occupation, grief of your everyday life not being what it was. Like I know we're kind of bouncing around in some places, but in Star Wars, what is it? Which one is it?
Andor?
No, it's the animated series Rebels. Star Wars Rebels. One of the kids, and I can't remember his name right now. I'm a bad Star Wars fan. But he goes back to his home on Lothal, and it's just different. It is occupied now, and so there is this grief of what was normal and what my life was before is not what it is going to be now. And that definitely it happens sometimes. And I know people will look back on their life and it's like, oh, I'm not this anymore, or this was the last time like we did this. I'm not gonna. The grief of the past happens, but war, I feel like, expedites those things and quickly takes away and changes things, so you don't really have time to process and say goodbye to those things, and that
it
grief
feels
just
so
comes.
Senseless.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
You can't really give that a good purpose, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. And sacrifice is a big theme that kind of wraps into heroism, but at the same time, it's like, what's Rosie the Riveter, or what was her name?
Yeah.
Anyway, so like all of the, well, a good chunk of young women in the U.S. during World War II had to go off and leave their families and do riveting.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a big sacrifice compared to what they were doing before that, right?
Yeah.
In order,
Now that you said Gears of War, I think of you played through all the games, right?
I haven't played through 4, but I have it downloaded because Steam had it on sale the other
Okay,
day.
right. So
I
you
sold
played.
my Xbox before it came out, so
So yeah, there's a Dominique Santiago, man. He sacrifices himself to save the crew, and
yeah,
that was a fan favorite, character for Gears of War 1 and 2. And you go through his whole story of grief, and he's trying to find his wife. He's keeping hope throughout the entirety of this war that's happening. This, I want to say it's like 15-20 year war that's happening on their planet, and he is trying to continue. He's finding clues and stuff on where she's at because they got separated, and now he's continuing to find her. And in Gears 2, he finds her, but she is in a state that is of no return, and he can't save her. And then he finally sacrifices himself for the last person he really loves, which is Marcus Phoenix. And so he sacrifices, and man, it's just that when that happened, I was like jaw drop, like no way this is happening. This is
yeah,
absolutely. I am shocked right now.
traumatizing.
Yeah, yeah. I remember just being like mouth
What?
wide open.
I
couldn't
quit.
believe it. Yeah,
Set down the controller.
yeah,
it wasn't.
yeah.
It wasn't playing it through on the hardest difficulty and dying like every 20 minutes. It
I
was
know.
Dom.
Oh my gosh. Well, it was such a tough
No.
moment too in that game because it was tough. It was supposed to be like this is the only way to get out of this situation, and it really was because you're just getting overrun with Lambent, and so it was wild, absolutely wild.
Yeah, sacrifice, man.
It sticks with you. It
Yeah,
sticks with your reader and your audience.
and it's a beautiful thing.
Next
Yeah,
theme is brutality, and we've touched on this already.
we
But
love the violence.
yeah, I mean, some people really do. It is we crave violence, right? But that brutality, whether it's fantasy, so you seeing the brutality of whatever happens, and then seeing some of the other the heroism, seeing the joys, those should be going hand in hand.
Speaking of Gears of War, there's nothing better than firing up that chainsaw and just sawing something in half. I mean,
Yes.
just blood everywhere.
So nice,
Yeah,
so
the
beautiful.
brutality, man. Brutality.
Yeah.
Changing personal beliefs. This one's a little bit more complicated than the other themes, but it's just like, I think the most notable one of like, Saving Private Ryan, to me, the thing that stuck out is that because they hit on it twice, where it was like there were, it wasn't the same character, I don't think, where they decided to let somebody live.
Mhm.
And they were like, I know I'm going to kill somebody. Like I would kill anybody because I know that it means, if I don't kill them, they're going to turn around and kill my family and all this
Mhm.
stuff. Everybody talks big. And then they had somebody in front of them that they let live.
Mhm.
And it was like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
That's not what you said you believed,
Mhm. Yeah.
That's probably not what they thought they believed. And then the situation presented itself, and then they're like, no, I can't do that. I'm not
Mhm.
that person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think
But that's really powerful, right?
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
how many moments in our lives do we totally alter our beliefs? I
Where
mean,
where is the character development? Like I
Mhm.
think what is it in I want to say it's Avatar in the animation. There's a point where it's like, is this character development? Like they call it out, right? And Avatar, another theme of war, right? And
Yes.
man, talk about changing of personal beliefs. If you follow the Aang Gang's story, like they have a whole change. Follow Zuko's story too. It's a whole change of personal beliefs. This whole thing at the beginning of the show is, I must find the Avatar and restore my honor, to where he ends up fighting side by side with Aang to stop the Fire Lord. So that is not stop him in directly, but to fight against his father. So
Yeah.
that changing of personal beliefs happens through this theme of war.
And that's a good note too, is that changing of personal beliefs can come with all kinds of consequences, not just loss of life. It can be loss of family. It can
Mhm.
be loss of status. It can be all kinds of stuff. But it's like we have an attachment to people who choose their beliefs over over the consequences, whatever the story is. But there definitely is that sort of overarching theme in themes of war settings, war settings. So why do we use war in our settings? So you have one right now, a
Yeah.
story you're working on right
Mhm.
now. Why did you choose to reintroduce war?
I a couple things, right? I wanted to touch on the political aspect of a campaign setting. The people I'm playing with, I feel like that is what they would like a little bit more, is a little bit more political intrigue, and that's also something that's a little bit risky for me because I that's not something I am an expert at. And so I wanted to push my own boundaries by doing that, and I wanted to see where the story is going to go because I wanted to create a dynamic of tension, and I think that threat of war happening created that. Some people had some backstory where this person was at war, and there was a general here that killed a dwarven king, and now the dwarves don't have a nation. And so I wanted to introduce that character, and through some roles and just with the system we're using, I was like, I think this is the direction we're gonna go, so that there is a clear kind of bad guy, honestly. um, and I also wanted to introduce different places for people to go. Like there's gonna potentially be a war front, and this war front honestly is at the edge of another character's home. So what are they gonna do here? Like I wanted to push their I
Allegiance,
put
alliances.
not necessarily their allegiance, but I wanted to push them as characters to see what are the decisions you're going to be making going forward, and this is the time for you to step up and be those heroes, and hit those themes of grief, sacrifice, brutality. Like there was a big event and bombs are going off, so this is the start of potentially either they can either squash this right now, and it is a very bad public relations event,
Yeah.
or people survive this and a war has started. um and so it's a fantasy game. We're also trying to push the system and the mechanics that we're doing, for because we're playtesting the system. And so I want to create strife right now so that there is a clear, potentially clear bad guy, but also uh I wanted to do something fun. It's interesting. I showed you my document of all the different kingdoms and dynasties that I created, and I want to bring these characters alive, and they're all here in the city now. So what are they gonna do? There are these uh, legendary figures in that were legendary in the war who are here now, and these are level 2 adventurers. So
Scary.
yeah, what are you gonna do? I wanted to create this kind of scary vibe. um
Yeah,
yeah.
so what I'm hearing is you're ratcheting up the intensity.
Mhm.
You're including the possibility of fighting almost as much as the characters want. If they want to get ahead of the front or behind it,
Mhm.
that's a possibility, but they have the opportunity to sort of dip into the fighting anytime they want to.
Yeah, so and so I think what this even started is I didn't know how they were going to respond to this. Immediately, what it felt like is they were going to run, and so when they did, they noticed that there was another group um, heading towards the chaos. And when one of the players can do telepathy and started reading their mind, they're like the distraction worked. They're like, okay, now we're trying to figure out like what's happening, what distraction, what's going on, and they figured out that the purpose of the attack here is to kill the royalty of the kingdom that they're a part of. So then their first thought was, we needed to go and defend the rest of the royalty then, or at least help in the fight. So now they're helping the royalty of the kingdom. And so that is a little bit of
At level 2.
heroism. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Trust me, dude, this system level 2 is pretty hefty.
Nice.
Um, so level 2 of 10.
Oh, heard.
Yeah. So
Heard.
so now there is this heroism moment where they're coming up and they're defending and fighting with the royalty here. And so it was a really cool moment of actually like going and descending and helping them out. And now they're making a name for themselves and allying with this kingdom. They've allied with somebody else. It's like it's just, I wanted to make it complicated, make it complex a little bit, and give those themes that we're talking about today.
And
try and make those things happen. Because like we said, war, you can do it in a non-war setting. You can create these themes. You can create these settings, and if you don't have war, that's great. You can still do it. There are plenty of storytelling devices that you can use, but the conflict of war creates those quickly.
Yes.
I feel like so
and
that's part of it.
and that first step is so galvanized, I guess. Like as soon as you see their first step into heroism, then it's like that is the motivation that you get to play with for the rest of the
Mhm.
the next act of the story is like,
Exactly.
oh, okay, this is the decision you made, this is why. Okay, everything that comes after is going to be sort of fraying the edges of that.
Yep. Exactly.
And that's cool.
Yeah.
For me, when I think of war stories that I've really liked, I think Spies and Assassins. I think I think that those are the most intense roles to me, because it's like there is, just through their wanderings throughout the world, they see the brutality and they see the stakes over and over and over, and they know that if they're found out, that it's immediately death, right?
Mhm.
And even like communicating anything, like if they fail their mission, it's death. If they, there is no room for error. And I feel like those are the really cool war stories to me, because that's way more about their lives as they are pursuing information or killing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's not so much about the actual interaction with the front or with the actual battles. And from what I'm hearing you talk about that story, it's the same thing, where it's like, if you make it about the war, almost it cheapens the story
Mhm.
a little bit. I've seen some movies that it was all about being on the front line, and it was still good, but
Mhm.
um, not as
That's
good
more
as the
like
other
it's
ones.
more like eye candy, right? Like we
Yeah,
as human, I mean,
like
we
the Avengers, the Marvel movies, right? It's
yeah,
war. It's just
eye
pretty
candy.
war.
Transformers. That I
Oh,
mean, for
dude,
it
yeah.
is now just eye candy, right? Like we enjoy. I'm not gonna pay to go and watch it, but if it's on, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll watch it because they obviously put
I'm
like money in.
intrigued.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they put money into it, and they're doing dope CGI stuff. For all the flack that I give the Halo show, their CGI is good, right? It's
Yeah.
good eye candy. But I feel like what's missing from the Halo show is like the actual characters that we care about and um creating good conflict that we actually care about. They have done a pretty bad job at that.
Dude.
Um,
We'll have another Halo episode next week, so we can really tear into that next time.
yeah, yeah,
Because that's how that's gonna go.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
But all right.
Yeah.
So drawbacks of using war, and we'll wrap out here.
Mhm.
This is the last segment of today's show.
Well, I guess that first point that you have there is almost what we were talking about. Is it's just eye candy,
I did
right?
such a good transition
I
just
know,
now.
dude. That was solid. That was real solid.
Remember me when you think good transitions.
Yeah. Drawback of using where action isn't everything and can be boring, right?
Yes.
So could you imagine reading Transformers? Oh my gosh, dude. That
In a
would be
whirl
awful.
of parts, he transformed.
I know, right?
Every single combat.
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. I guess action books can be out there. Action stories can be there, but a story without meaningful consequences can only take you so far, and maybe will bring some people in at first, but there's got to be some type of story, some thread, something interesting to grab your audience. Potentially, maybe not.
Yeah. All right. The next one is difficulty without hope, joy, or purpose can make readers numb.
Mhm.
And that is a difficulty of the setting, because it's somber, because it's heavy. Um, we don't necessarily give the joy its due. We don't give the happiness and the love and the hope its due. We just let our characters flounder in this awful situation, and they never smile, and they're never happy, and everyone's always crying, right? Like that can leave your readers, your viewers numb. Like I've
Mhm.
seen, I had the privilege of going to see a script reading for a movie that was like pre-production, or not. It was in the being sold circuit, right? So they were farming it out to people, and they were looking for feedback. And this is Austin Film Festival, so like how often you get to do that? Like how many times? Maybe every year, I don't know. But I had the privilege of going to one, and it was about human trafficking, and everything was terrible. I mean, granted, human trafficking is terrible,
Yeah.
but every moment was bad. And it's like, well, you don't think that they made friends with other people that were human trafficked, or at least have positive conversations every
Mhm.
now and again? You don't think anybody around them ever smiled, or like, was the bright light that sort of coaxed everyone forward? Those personalities are out there. People
Mhm.
who look for the joy in even the worst environments. So, if you don't have anyone leading that joyful, that memory that things can still be okay, even though right now sucks.
Mhm.
If you don't have those, it can be a slog reading that stuff or
Yeah.
watching it. So,
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
that's a drawback. That's something you want to look out for, and not
Mhm.
do.
The last point here is resolution may feel rushed or meaningless when the war happens outside the scope of the main character's journey.
Yeah. So that's um, a little bit in opposition of what we talked about already, but um, I've read books before, and I won't throw their titles out there because it's not great. But I've read books before where it's like everything that happened in the book was about the war, and then they just sort of like got a newspaper that said the war was over.
Mm.
And it's like, yeah, that's some people's story, right? That does happen, but it's not very interesting. It's
Mhm.
like you're robbed of that crescendo. You're robbed of having that moment that changes everything, unless your story, not this book, but unless your story happens to have another crescendo that is unrelated. But I mean, the entire story was about this, and it was just like, yeah, it's over.
Mhm.
So you're left there going, okay, well then what was all the like? Was it just anxiety that I read for the last 3 days?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the answer in that case was yes, but it's not a very satisfying read.
Mhm.
It doesn't conform to the 3 act structure maybe
Mhm.
in a pleasing way. But yeah, just make sure that you let your players or your readers interact with the war in a meaningful way that allows them to feel
Mhm.
um, when it starts, when it ends, that sort of thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Whatever beats are necessary for your story.
Yeah. So
Don't rush that shit.
yeah, a lot of good themes. It feels like especially drawing inspiration from Saving Private Ryan. It's pretty heavy setting, right? But there are so many other settings where there is kind of that light, that hope. We talk about Avatar. I mean, masterclass on war, and there still being hope from beginning, middle, and end. Middle kind of rough, but definitely end. And even each episode almost has its own uh light.
Comedy and joy.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's definitely a setting where, if let's say the war didn't happen, would Aang have been such close friends with Sokka and the rest of the Aang gang? And
And would he have even learned all the other bending skills?
I mean, he probably would have eventually, right? Every
Yeah,
avatar
just no
does
rush.
eventually, but yeah, exactly. And that's where, the trauma bonding, the camaraderie has come through, right? He becomes very, very good friends with Zuko and the Fire Nation, so there are a lot of things that happen there. And that was a war setting, and that still keeps that kind of lightheartedness. Um, so we have two ends of the spectrum there as far as how serious you can get with it. Um, Attack on Titan doesn't really leave you with a lot of hope at the end of it. It's dark, but hey, sometimes that's the brutal reality of life, because there are also some good moments along the way, which is why I've gone through and watched at least the first 3 seasons a handful of times already. So war can be a really good setting, and it doesn't have to be completely about the war. Like we said, there are so many different shows and animations that are about the effects of the war afterwards, or about prepping for the war beforehand, and seeing those things kind of happen. Um,
Like I see so many articles, like when I was doing research for this episode, it was like reasons you shouldn't use war in
mhm,
your setting, reason
yep.
why, you're not a good enough writer for war yet, all this stuff. And it's like um not much is out there being encouraging. So that's what we try to do for you here on
Yeah.
the Creative Thinker podcast. Try to be a little bit of hope out here.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
you can do war. You just got to do it right. You just got to pay attention to what levers you're pulling on and when.
Mhm,
And I think this has been a good conversation on highlighting those for you. So
yeah.
hope you enjoyed it. Can't wait to see you next week. Till then, peace.
Bye. Thank you for watching the Creative Thinker podcast. We put a lot of love and attention into every show And with that comes a lot of time and money.
You can help us out through the support links in the description. You can sponsor an episode, you can subscribe to our Patreon, and as always, you can follow, like, subscribe, and share all of our channels.
We are eternally grateful for your support as we continue to bring you more episodes of the Creative Thinker podcast.
Creative thinkers all over the globe. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.